just want people to, so I want people to, you know, who don't, I mean, many people listening might already have had their experiences, but I had this experience with my grandma, who I was really close to, where, we were very, very close. And when she started to get Alzheimer's, she said, I wanted to give you this gold necklace, beautiful Italian gold necklace, but she forgot where she put it.
Oh.
And so just year by year went by, and then she got more and more unable to. She always spoke a little bit. So she said to me, so she was gone then. So I'm like, well, we'll never know where that Italian gold necklace was. And then one day when I was with her, we were lying on the bed together and just holding hands. She kind of always knew I was special to her. And all of a sudden she snapped out of it and she came back.
Mm.
And the first thing she said is, I think I know where the gold necklace is.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and then she said, look in my closet and find my bathrobe. So I got her bathrobe and she says, look at the hem. She had sewn it into the hem. And so we took the necklace out. And then, we spent about 10, 20 more minutes. She was saying how much she loved me. And we're just, sharing this special time together. And then she was gone again.
Yeah.
And never,
Wow.
never to come back. And it's interesting because when she was immigrating to the United States, she was from the Ukraine, and she had sewn. They had smuggled out their a wealth, which they hardly had any, into the hems of their skirt.
Wow. That's amazing. It's a really good illustration though of, how being present, just being like entering into the space with that openness to just be there can just open up those times for that magic experience. And I know we mentioned this briefly before we started. I know that, Kirsten, my wife, often who's involved in palliative care, just often says that if that space can be brought together, that there's such a time of healing for everybody involved who's going through that process together, because sometimes, not everybody's at the same stage of where they're at with
Yeah,
dealing with this and relating to this experience.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
really amazing, isn't it? So
Yeah.
amazing.
So are there a couple of things that you would think would be key messages that from your experience, both, as a daughter and also a Dharma practitioner and a teacher, that would be things? I mean, you've spoken about creating this idea of the sacred space, of
Mhm.
entering into it and entering into the experience of that. Are there some other things that you would recommend for Buddhist practitioners, particularly, of how to relate this experience with their
Mhm.
path and incorporate it in their life?
Yeah. Well, I always, of course, to become familiar with your nature and not to be so intimidated by your own mind, which I think go hand in hand.
Yeah,
And this
lovely.
is this is our work, right? So having some trust in your nature, and then also not having this judgment about your experience that you're having, to take everything as your teacher, which is really, of course, the practice of sadhana, that everything has value, you know, if you decide, I mean, that's a choice. To choose that everything has value, you could not choose that, and a lot of people don't. So this is what makes it a dharma experience. So we're training, to familiarize ourselves, and then, to take everything as a teacher, as how you, if you value things, then you're not as intimidated by your mind, and you see the nature, and there's liberation in that. And then I think, like, in terms of creating circumstances, of course, then we need to be, you must know this much better, and your wife as well, try to make sure you could either stay at home or to go into one of those, like, Danish homes. And there's some
There you
really
go.
good ones. I know there's some good ones, really good ones. So I don't want to say just stay at home, although this was during COVID, so glad mom stayed at home. Thank goodness. I don't know about meds, like, as you say, it doesn't sound like a very good idea since they don't seem to be effective. But I found mom's mind very bright because of she's very sensitive to her medication, so that's part of why we didn't even really. We tried a little here or there for things, but it just didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think those two things that you mentioned about familiarizing ourselves with our nature and not being afraid of our mind, I think that summarizes perfectly what's been my whole approach, is because
Huh.
through practice, whether it's a simple mindfulness practice or other practices we can cultivate, we learn to loosen up on that grasping to each thought and emotion as me and I, and kind of becoming absorbed into that. Because the thing, especially with dementias, are that this is the stuff that's going to change, that we don't have any control over as the disease progresses. It's the content of our experience that is going to change. And if our identity is bound to the content, and the content is changing irrevocably, of course, it's terribly threatening and frightening. Whereas if we can create that space between, sure, there's this content, but then there's this nature, and becoming more familiar with that, it gives us a much more abiding ground with which to go through.
Yeah, I love what you're saying because, yeah, there's the conditioned and there's the unconditioned. And in fact, I think some people, they want to stay so much in control that actually they don't even have the opportunity to let go unless something like this happens.
Sure, yeah.
And I have a feeling about that, that maybe certain things can be dealt with better when that whole um, configuration of how we see the world falls away. Um, this falling away is very interesting. I was thinking about this, today because I knew we were going to talk, and I was thinking, in a way, when we practice, for example, well, in the Mahayana analytical meditation, we're actually taking apart delusion. We're not really taking apart delusion. We're disassembling the way we look at the world. We're
Yeah.
deconstructing that in a certain way. And I always say, because I'm very fascinated with analytical meditation, analysis, and the Greek root for analysis means to set free or
Yeah, that's beautiful.
to loosen out of your concepts that bind you. And in the Vajrayana, we have like a texture practice, which has to do with cutting through the delusion, like chopping it up, or probably shouldn't say so much, but breaking apart or allowing it to fall apart. And here, we look at dementia is just one individual's experience of the falling apart of the physical body and the brain.
Yeah,
The
absolutely. Yeah.
brain is gone. I came upon this beautiful a verse. It's in the. I thought to read it. It's from a tantra. Usually I don't read this, but it had such a strong impact on my mind. If you want, I can read it at the end or now. But
Yeah, please do.
yeah, this really struck me, and it was in the commentary on Longchenpa's Chuingzi, and it comes from a
Oh, yeah.
tantra called the Pearl Garland, and it's one of those. I wouldn't want to try to analyze it or explain it, but it has to do with the dualism falling apart, and it has something to do with death and aging and all that, and using those words. So I thought maybe I should read it, but um, I won't say too much about it. Just
Yeah,
it's
let's
like one of
let's
those
hear it.
things that speaks to your nature, not to your intellect. So
Which is
should I?
great, because this is, like you said, the cutting through to, what's our home.
Yeah, yeah. So should I read it now, you think?
Please do, yes.
Okay. It says, birth is the arising of enlightened form. The growth of the body is the ground of being manifest as sensory appearances, while abiding in the body is the ground. Aging is the clearing away of confusion. Illness is the indwelling confidence of realization. With death, there is freedom in the empty nature of phenomena. Thus, all beings manifest in form are effortlessly and timelessly perfect Buddhas.
Wow.
I, that one really, such a deep way, spoke to me, and it's so in contrast with this feeling of horror we have about loss and dementia and death and falling apart. And it honors the falling apart. It seems to me like a liberation in that poem, and so I found it very touching. The practitioner's view is a very different view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is exactly kind of one of the things that I really wanted to highlight here was how this experience can be embraced, as it were, for a Buddhist practitioner as part of the path. Whereas, if everything is about this life and where we are and who we are and what we know, then of course this is a complete destruction, and it's a completely different experience. And how we approach this is completely dependent on our orientation. And this is where the great beauty and skill of the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings come, because it brings us in alignment with this reality of impermanence, dissolution,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
ground.
Disillusion. Yeah. Yeah. It's so wonderful that you're doing the work that you do. I'm sure you're benefiting so many people through this work. It's so, what a gift, to have that kind of support for
Well,
people.
I hope so. I'll tell you one very quick story. Just
Okay,
I had
wonderful.
recently, and it goes to a few things that you've talked about. This was a gentleman who I've been working with who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 16 months ago now. So he came to see me when he first received a diagnosis, and we started doing, started with some mindfulness training and some meditation techniques and all the rest of it. And and this was a gentleman who liked to ride a lot, and he would go off and exercise. And as things progressed, of course, we were able to establish him in a practice and simplify it so that it was very kind of elegant, and he was able to embrace that and practice that daily. And he would go for rides every now and then, and occasionally he would forget where he was, because that's just how it is, right?
Yeah, it
And
is.
he would come back and I'd say, "How did you go this week?" And he said, "Well, I was out for a ride and I didn't know where I was." And usually he would start to get panicked, of course, and get stressed and upset. And that would just make things worse. And he said, "Look, I just sat down in the park and I did my mindfulness for 10 minutes and I settled down and I remembered my way home and then I rode home." And so there were these great moments continually happening where, he was able to cope with the changes that were happening. And, I saw him recently, and he'd just been to see his gerontologist, who was managing his treatment. And, he was saying that the gerontologist was, just about to, they said it was really strange because he was just about to hug us. He was really emotional because he explained that he thought we would be coming in to say, "What drugs can you give us now? What drugs are available?" And they weren't there for that at all. In fact, they weren't interested in that. And he just said to them, "Just keep doing whatever it is that you're doing, because it's much, much better than any drug that I could possibly give you."
Oh, that's so good.
And, this is not because of anything, that I'm doing or anything else. This is just our minds and the Buddha's skillful technique of revealing how to work with and train our minds. And it shows that, there is something that we can do even in these situations where our pathology is changing, our brain is changing, because we are more than just our brain, as you say.
Yeah, this is the power of the mind that often in the realm of the medical world is not so acknowledged. So it's so wonderful. Actually, it was so interesting. I think I just sent Jakob a link of Alan Wallace having a debate with a physicist at Dartmouth College,
Yeah.
about the power of the mind and kind of kind of debating around this whole materialistic view we have around the body and about, how we just who we are. And I thought he did a fabulous job.
Yeah. I
Getting
think Alan has a
with
really skillful way of communicating those things.
Oh, it was so good. I've watched it like 8 times over the years. Yeah.
But I can tell you, as a neuroscientist who's done hundreds and hundreds of EEGs and MRIs, sure, I can watch somebody's neural activity in milliseconds as they make decisions. But the one thing I can't tell you is, what were they thinking?
Right. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
never we never know what that experience is like, what they're thinking or anything about that, because this is mind and it's non-observable by these techniques, of course.
Yeah.
So this is where we have to remain open.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating, wonderful story. It shows a lot
Yeah.
of success in the work that you do.
Yeah, I think this is the new frontier for where we're going with our scientific endeavors. We've come a long way with the body, and now, hopefully the mind will catch up.
Yeah.
So what I might do, Elisabeth, is I'll see if there are some questions. Now that we're at 12 o'clock, we have a bit of time for some questions. So if you do have questions, please type them into the chat box, and I'd be happy to read those and ask Elisabeth for you. So let me just have a look and see if there's anything there. Okay. Please, Elisabeth, would you mind passing on the link or reference for Longchenpa's quote of the Pearl Garland, which you read, which was so beautiful? As you say, I think that's in his auto commentary, the Chuingzi, right?
Yeah, yeah. I know. I felt a little funny about reading it because it's like it's a restricted text, so I'm a little bit like hesitant to send it out into the ethers. I want to be
Sure.
responsible.
Okay,
I
we'll
wasn't
park that
sure.
with Jakob.
Okay, let me talk to Jakob about it and see what he says. I usually don't do things like that, but this one was just seems so like so helpful. I'd like to send it out, but I just want to I'm going to talk to Jakob about it, see what he thinks.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for.
Okay, let's.
Getting
We've got another question that's just come in from Tanya. Did you have to work with grief during your mother's early changes? And thank you so much for your candor and vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been moments. There have been moments that it's hard to see her struggle, or moments where I wish I could talk to her about something. But then I realized, why would I not talk to her about something? So I
Sure.
continue to talk to her. I say, Mom, if you only knew what the world was like now. Mom, I wonder what you would think about,
Yeah,
there's
well,
so
she's still
much.
there, right? So you can still talk to her.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes I ask her a question, and I ask for permission for things.
That's great.
I asked her if she could pass something on to me, not physical, but something like knowledge. Can you pass that on? And she said yes. And
Lovely.
I don't know how to get that, but I just figure I'll absorb it somehow. You just keep. I don't know. It's not so much grief, really. I mean, it's her time. It's time. It's all.
Yeah. Do you
I
think that as we were talking about that idea of letting go, and especially the openness to experience and openness to how things are, does that help with something like grief, do you think?
Yeah. It's funny. People do grief differently. Like when my dad died, I was
Yes, for that. Yeah.
so close with my dad. But I don't know, I didn't feel so much grief. But then all of a sudden, 3 years later, I'm in the swimming pool, and I know that he used to love it there in the hot springs, and all of a sudden I'll just burst out crying now. Even now, I miss him. I just miss him, or I wish I could tell him something, or I appreciate something. It kind of is a little bit more like that for me. It's just not been, it wasn't like, I don't know, being around dying people, and I lost one of my best friends from cancer, and I was with him a lot the last month, every day, and I was there. Our teacher couldn't be there, so I did the cremate. I was asked to do like oversee everything, and we have a cremation grounds here, outdoor
Oh,
cremation
wow.
in our
That's so
community.
special.
It's unbelievable. We only have two in the whole country, and one is
Wow.
here in our town. And they do a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful job. It's a beautiful place. And
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think as you're speaking, what comes to mind is just how powerful the Buddhist path is, because it brings us closer and closer in touch with reality, of not being in denial and really being in touch with the raw experience of what it means to be alive, to get sick, to be old, and also to die. And so I think being really realistic and having that view really helps through those challenging times when, otherwise grief or resistance or whatever it is that might come up.
Yeah, I think if you've been at least to some degree accepting impermanence for year after year and watching your mind, and you're not going to be lamenting and pulling out your hair when somebody passes. I mean, I really expect, I know I'm going to pass. I'm aging, and I don't know. It's natural. It's natural. I
It
wouldn't
is
want.
natural, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a big opportunity for us. And, as we're talking, not only to for personal growth, but relationship wise, and also with our own practice, if we can really embrace that.
Mhm.
Yeah. I've got another question here. Elisabeth, for us as practitioners, do you have any simple advice or anchor for us if we are demented or dying to come back to? It would need to be deeply embedded for the habit to return to, even if we've lost our memory or we've become under the influence of dementia.
Mhm.
So
So how do we return to the habit of?
yeah, I think if I'm understanding right, is there some advice or a simple practice that we can always come back to as our anchor, as our center, that
Yeah.
we've developed over time?
Well, one thing that was really, like I said, helpful for my mom was to come back to something she really could do. She could really breathe. she could. She understood breath. She could always come back to the breath, and so there's this sense of sanity there for her,
Hmm.
and also something that she could still control,
Uh,
or
I
that
just
she.
can't hear you there, Elisabeth, unfortunately. Is it
Oh,
just me or
sorry.
is it others as well? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now? Uh-oh.
We can hear you.
Huh. Okay, that's good. Ben, can you hear? So something's
Sorry,
up with.
Elisabeth. I'm just having a bit of an audio problem. Okay, how is that?
Can you hear me
I
now?
can hear Elizabeth. I can hear both of you.
Hmm. Did you
Is it
press?
just me that's lost the audio there? If anyone?
Yes, we can hear you, Ben.
Yeah, we
Yes,
can hear Ben and Elizabeth.
and Elizabeth.
Like only your problem, Ben.
There you go. I can hear again all of a sudden.
Good.
Sorry about that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we were talking about what you could do, what you could return to.
Yes.
So I just was saying that I found the breath for my mom very helpful, and I'll say this other thing that I see that's helpful. The reason people say mantras and use a mala is because it brings you right back in touch in a simple way. That's why all the elders in Tibet, they're always saying mantras, mantras, mantras. They're developing this like imprint in their mind because they can return to the mantra, and it's connected to that connection with the deity and a sense of faith and devotion. I often even say that suggest this is something I do. I have a mala by my bed, and it has a big beads, and I take it to bed with me and put it in my hand, so that in the middle of the night when I wake up, I say, "Oh, my mala," and it reminds me of. I think that's what malas are actually for.
That's
It's not just
fantastic.
to count, but it's to give you a physical connection that's also, connected to your own heart and mind, and sound and something to connect to. The mala is very good, like for that.
Yeah. And as the question I think was indicating, it's something that we need to kind of train ourselves in now. Yeah. We need to train ourselves and become familiar with those things now. It's very, very difficult when we start having difficulties, and then we've got other factors working against us to adopt these things. So now is the time, right?
Now is the time. That's the point. Now is the time. Not only will it make your life better now, but we're trying to familiarize ourselves with our own nature and have confidence in it, and to make it what I was saying before, like our default place.
A
Like the
default,
lamas.
yes.
Our lamas are. I could say they always default there, but they never leave. they're always there at that place, in an unwavering way. So we're trying to create a refuge place,
Yeah, our true refuge, right?
true refuge.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing, because we do define, even from a neurological point of view, we would say, we've discovered this default mode network, that when we just kind of switch off, we come back to this default mode activation, and it's what we're used to, right? It's what we're kind of familiar with, and that can either be our mind wandering and being distracted and being caught up in memories of past, present, or future. Or, as you say, it can be something that's a really simple practice that, I'm just returning to this place of simplicity, or this place of connecting with my mala, or this place of connecting with the breath. And so that in the absence of all else, that's what we return to. But
exactly,
establishing that ground through familiarity of training is just so important, because I always like to think we do these practices, especially mindfulness in this context, we do it when we can do it, for when we need it. We do it now for when we need it later.
Yeah. No, it's so great to hear you describe that from a neurological point of view, because it seems like that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
That
We're
kind
such
of
creatures of habit, we know that through our life. And as we talked about, those habits get stronger as we get older. We become more who we are in a personality sense a lot of the time. Our thoughts become more and more similar and ingrained because it's more habit. And, those things are happening because we're activating certain parts of our brain over and over and again. So we're reinforcing these networks, and, those things become a habit. So all of this, while that's one side of that coin, I like the other side of the coin is the fact that we are continually responsive, dynamic, and fluid beings. Nothing is hardwired and unchangeable. Well, because it's all impermanent, right? But we can change this. We can change our behavior, our cognition, and our brain, because we respond to what we do. And this is why Dharma practice, I think, is so amazing, because we respond in a pervasive level to this. I'll give you a couple of just quick examples, because I find this really, really helpful to show that we can take the reins of our own destiny, as it were. It is a very empowering message to know that we can actually take charge of our direction through our own intention and purposeful practice. And, a couple of quick stories about a few studies of meditation and mindfulness. Obviously we know that mindfulness can change the brain now. Just 8 weeks of mindfulness is enough to change the structure of the brain, the volume and the size of the brain, the white matter connections between different regions. We know that, a lot of the work that I've done, it can make the neural activity faster, more efficient, so that our neurons actually fire quicker. But, this is a symptom of a more subtle process, so that we know that this is something to do with the way meditation changes our genetic code, the way our genes are expressed on a molecular level. We're not a fixed deck of cards, as it were. Like we used to, we thought here's your hand of cards you've been dealt with at birth, and please don't lose any cards. You're not going to get any more. And so we now know that that's not the case, and everything we do affects the way our genetic code is expressed. And so just practicing mindfulness changes the way our inflammatory signaling proteins are expressed, our immune proteins are expressed, our cellular metabolism regulation. And, on a fundamental level, just engaging with this is starting to reshape not only our physiology, but our psychology and our mind and awareness, which leads to a behavioral change. So we are pervasively responsive if we know how to drive that train. And fortunately, the Dharma gives us a very detailed manual and textbook of how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. We're not doomed.
We're not doomed. It's never too late.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's such an empowering thing to recognize.
Yeah, it's incredibly empowering, because, if we take the opposite view that we're just our physiology, I'm just my brain.
Yeah, there's no agency in that. I don't know how anybody could think that. It doesn't make any sense to me how that is even a question.
That's a really disempowering position, I think, to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question here. Does science find that micro movements of the fingers activates the brain, Ben. Chinese medicine does. The Mala suggestion is perfect. Thank you, Elisabeth.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's specific areas of the brain called our somatosensory cortex. And actually, the biggest part of this, one of the biggest parts is the mapping that involves our hand, because they're so densely arrayed with nerves so that we have so much sensation and touch that this is actually one of the biggest parts of our somatosensory cortex. So yes, doing this with your hand leads to changes in the way that those neurons fire, and also the things that are connected to them, because the brain isn't just Lego blocks all stuck together. It's just one big network. And when we activate those parts, that activates the parts related to it that we connect meaning to, as you were saying, Elisabeth. Oh, what does the Mala bring me back to? What does that connect me to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so all of those things we can train in and reinforce.
Oh, that's a fascinating connection with the finger movements and the very interesting.
Yeah, we have this kind of
Yes.
mapping across the middle part of our brain, the somatosensory cortex, and the two areas that take the most, let's say, real estate in this are our hands and our face.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's so much sensation, so much, of our messaging comes through these two modalities. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are the two main places in a certain way, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
clear. Communicating. Hmm.
Okay, let's have a look and see if there's any more questions coming up in the chat. Okay, there's a question here from Matt. With the diminishing of the usual areas of identification, is it ever the case that people become in a way liberated through the process of identity falling away? Or is the anxiety and fear through attempting to cling to self the main experience? Because, this process that we're talking about of, dying with dementia is certainly a disintegration of that self. And, that there's certainly, that tendency that we can have to cling and try and claim what we're losing, or as we've been talking about, to relax. Is that something that you've noticed with your mother? Perhaps even, Elisabeth, this idea of liberating in some way from a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was maybe trying to say before a little bit, that the initial stage is hard because there's so much. Well, it's new. I think, for one thing, it's new that you can't access these tools that you were once so incredible at using. But then also, yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion that happens during that time, and a need to let go. And I thought that was the hardest part for my mom. But I do think there is an opportunity in this, and I think we've all thought that my mom has worked out a lot of things, like worn them out, or
Yeah.
they've they've kind of worn out. I don't know if that's the proper term, um, from her, like, non-grasping and just having to relax into just being.
Just being, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, great. Look, there's a question here that was earlier that I missed. It's a difficult one. Dear Elisabeth, what do you think about a friend of mine who committed suicide because she developed a psychosis at the age of 60 and was a great Dharma practitioner? Yeah, I don't know how much or what you would like to say about that.
I mean, I don't, I'm not a psychologist or anything, and I don't know anything much. I don't know anything about clinical psychiatry or anything, but there's something similar. I see there's this kind of interesting and very, like, this world that you have to go in with your friends who have some psychosis. I do have some friends who struggle, like, with schizophrenia and stuff like that. Some people I care very much for. Brilliant, brilliant. And sometimes I'm just astounded by the insight that my friends have. And then also sometimes when they're talking to me, it was a little bit like talking to my mom. Like, you just have to go into their world and talk to them. but I don't, I mean, there's so much difficulty in that. And gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so difficult. I'm not quite sure what to say. It's just, it's a very
Sure,
painful.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. And likewise,
Yeah.
my experience is not dealing with, mental health and suicide in that department. So, unfortunately, I don't have much to offer there, I'm afraid. Okay, there's another question here. Elisabeth, could you say something more about finding a common language with elderly parents or friends who don't have a practice of awareness, helping them to connect with their refuge, especially when there may be some fear or resistance and anxiety about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally not necessary to use Dharma language in this. It's so basic to being human, what we're all going through. So any kind of, in terms of caretaking, to make sure that everyone, that the person is feeling loved and cared for and nourished and stuff like that, but also just talking to them where they are. It's not like I really think this is a human thing. I always say dharma anyways. It's not a religious thing. It's a human. It's relating in a human, skillful human way. um, so whatever it is that means something to them. I saw this one video my friend sent me, my friend who works with elder care and people with dementia. And there was this one woman, I can't remember her name, but she was relating to people with music. Like she'd find out what kind of music they grew up with, and she'd play music they will sing, and it could be religious music or whatever. And she kind of brought the people out. They're really withdrawn, and then the music would bring them out. And some people also work. There's this other woman. She's fabulous. Tifa, Tifa, Tipa something. Anyway, she's American, very kind of tough lady, and she works with people with dementia, and they do movement stuff. You just have to find whatever it is that you can do. That brings joy, and whatever they'll let you know. Also, sometimes, like with my mom wanting to take walks, or but really treating them like they're very much alive. So like, it could be music, it could be just letting them sit in the sunshine, it could be, my brother's always been wonderful at taking my mom on long walks, when the leaves are changing or when it's not too cold. And we just try to, we show, have her watch the sunset. And I don't know, this is a very human, don't worry, a Buddhist, not Buddhist, I think to be very present there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make. It's not Buddhist to be human. So, and this idea of being with somebody and entering into their experience rather than saying, no, that's not how things are. You're wrong. It's not like that. Or,
That was so horrible.
Yeah, I remember a really wonderful thing I heard from an aged care professional, and saying that, dealing with somebody with dementia, they might not understand who or remember who you are or what's going on, but they'll know how you made them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And how you made them feel isn't about, did they get the words right, the name, the time, the place. It's the experience that you're talking about, coming into, whether that's walking outside, the sunset, or music. And those things are really powerful because they can cut through a lot of that confusion, because different areas of our memory are affected differently. So our memory for names and places and what happened when, that kind of is one of the things that is first affected in a dementia. But something called our procedural memory, which doesn't require labels and concepts, something like music or dancing, movement, those things are a completely different subcategory of memory, which is oftentimes really intact. And by accessing that, you can connect back to experience. How did that make you feel? And bring you back into that. So doing those things is a really wonderful way to cut through a lot of that confusion, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's another one here. Old photos remind us of our past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
do they serve as a stimulant for demented people in your experience, Elisabeth? Is that something you've used a bit, old photos and things like that?
Yeah, I sometimes my mom seems to relate and sometimes she doesn't. I try different things and it depends on her mood also. Um, One thing though I do notice is she likes things that have to do with children or little animals. So sometimes if I see something sweet on TV, I say, look at I show her. She likes that, children especially. And she always recognizes when her grandson, my son, comes to visit her. She always, I don't know, she loved him. Like he was the best, for her, in her eyes, he was the best. And so she feels so overjoyed. I can tell when he comes. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes the photos, I don't know, she doesn't say much. Sometimes I don't know, they go through all day different things. Sometimes more expressive, sometimes withdrawn too. So I think you just try and you play with it or
Yeah,
see
it's such a
where you're at.
personal thing, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
And everyone's going to have their own journey, and it's just about connecting with that. And as you say, if you can allow yourself to be present and connect with the person and find out what is working rather than trying to impose, oh, we need to do this particular thing now, being open and flexible.
Yeah, exactly. And not taking anything personally also.
That's a
In
great
the
point. Yeah.
beginning, I mean, people with dementia can say anything to you. You won't believe the kind of things sometimes that let's just put it that way. Could be anything. So this is where that one taste things comes in. You just don't take it personally and you laugh. You don't maybe have to laugh at the person, but you laugh at the humor of the situation. It's almost good for your ego, because you don't expect also much. Oh, mom's going to treat me the way she used to, or she's not expressing enough affection. They're just in a different world. It's just, you have to also let go of wanting anything.
Yeah, I think the letting go is such a big element, you know,
Yeah,
for all of us,
yeah.
at all the time.
And it will prepare us for when we die, get ready to die, as we'll talk.
Absolutely. Yes, there's a couple of further ones here we might have time for. It's said the state of mind at the time of death is critical. Does dementia significantly reduce any positive impact of long-term Dharma practice or significantly impact the state of mind at the time of death?
Yeah. I'm sure it all depends. I mean, we've been talking about how, in a certain way, it might be helpful to just break open all those kind of rigid conceptual ideas about our persona and who we are and it could be very helpful. I don't know, it's hard to say, what our mind is going to be like at death, dementia or no dementia.
Yeah. It's
And
going to be
this
tough.
is why we're practicing. Dementia is not just the dementia that affects, but are we going to be clinging? Are we going to be desperate? Are we going to be able to relax and let go? Are we going to, these are the things that kind of affect our kind of peaceful passing. It's interesting though, Ben, like I've been around a lot of people who have, passed. I don't know what your experience is or your wife's experience is, but I haven't really seen a death where somebody's like beating on their chest, so to speak. It always felt to me very sacred, actually, on some level.
Yeah, I think my wife Kirsten, who's assisted so many people through that, would similarly say that there's certainly an atmosphere there.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking about that question. How does it affect us through death? And if we would think, if we were to place this in terms of the dissolution process that we go through, as our physical elements dissolve as supports for consciousness, and then our 80 conceptions dissolve. These are all our gross minds, and these are the things that dementia is going to impact. It's not going to impact those levels of consciousness in the last 4 dissolutions. And so that's where you can say, yeah, I mean, we can say that these gross levels of consciousness, I think, are things that are definitely disturbed by dementia, but they're not the things that are going to persist all the way through that dissolution process, where that question was talking about mind of death is critical. Yeah, I think, as you were saying, whether we're going to be clinging or not in those times as we proceed through those dissolutions is kind of the key.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we've got time for one last question here. I think it's a comment more than a question. Let's see. Such an insightful and meaningful sharing today. Thank you, Elisabeth. And Ben, I especially love the reminder that all we need is to be human in relating warmly to what is meaningful to our aged beloveds, and that the Dharma language is not needed. Yeah, I think we don't need to overcomplicate it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so basic to who we are. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to now see if, I'm not sure if I can unspotlight us, whether I have that capacity, just to bring everybody into view here. But look, at this point, we're out of time now. So I'd just like to thank you so much, Elisabeth, for your time, spending this time with us to have a talk about your experience, especially with your mother, and provide some amazingly helpful advice that hopefully everyone can take something from and use.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ben. It's so wonderful to talk to you, and I've learned so many things also from you in this conversation. So it's just, I really appreciate that you're all thinking about these things, and yeah, this is a very worthy conversation, very important for all of us, really. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you
Oh.
all. And wonderful questions too.
Yeah. Oh, this program will be running all the way through to November, I believe, all the way, looking at how we manage death and care for those, and also then, doing practices for those who are at the end of life, and then talking about the Bardo dissolutions as well. So there's so much to talk about, and we look forward to it. And many thanks to everybody who's made this program possible. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll leave it there for today. And thank you again, Elisabeth. It was absolutely lovely to speak with you.
Thank you. Yeah, you too, Ben. Take good care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Elisabeth and Ben from Living is Dying. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sari.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Very lovely.
Thank you very much. Very, very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
What happened to Jakob? Did he lose his way? Lost his internet?
Yes, completely.
Oh,
Oh dear.
we made it through.
Yes, no, thank you, Ben. That was fabulous.
Great.
Yeah, really well.
Hopefully when Ben downloads the video, the recording, then maybe Yoko will download it at some time.
Yeah.